Good morning, everyone. I'm going to call the Assembly Committee on Judiciary to order. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Here.
Assemblywoman Cohen. Here. Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Here. Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy. Here. Assemblywoman Kasama. Here. Assemblywoman Krasner.
Here.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Wynn.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill. Assemblyman Orentlicker.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Here.
Assemblyman Wheeler.
Here.
Chairman Yeager.
I am here. Please mark Assemblyman O'Neill absent excused. Everybody else is present. That means we have a quorum. Good morning to members. Good morning to those joining us on the Zoom, and good morning to those who are here in the room, as well as those who may be watching on the internet or the legislature's YouTube channel. Welcome to Day 75 of the 81st session of the Nevada Legislature. Before we get started on today's agenda, just a few housekeeping matters. For those of you who are in the room with us, if you could please silence your devices, we would appreciate that. If you're in the room and you do intend to testify today, when you come to the table to testify, please make sure to turn the microphone on to clearly state your name. And then after you are done providing testimony, please be sure to turn the microphone off. If you are on the Zoom with us this morning, if you could please mute yourself when you're not speaking, that'll help with the audio feedback. And if you could please remember to state your name each time you speak, particularly when you're answering a question, that'll help us prepare accurate committee minutes. We do expect courtesy and respect in our interactions with one another. We don't always agree on policy. That is perfectly acceptable, but we need to make sure we're being respectful of one another, of the legislative process, and most importantly, of our staff, who is working very hard to have these meetings work for us. And then finally, many of the members are using multiple devices to access documents and exhibits, so please don't see it as a sign of disrespect if members appear to be looking at devices or laptops or phones or iPads along the way. Most likely we're accessing notes or exhibits for the bills. With those matters behind us, we're going to move on to our agenda, and I will intend to likely take the bills in order depending on when presenters arrive, but for now we'll start with the first bill on the agenda, and that is Senate Bill 45 in its first reprint. So I'll now open the hearing on that bill. Senate Bill 45, reprint 1, revises provisions relating to crimes, and we have Ms. Adair with us this morning, as well as Mr. George and Ms. Riley. I'm not sure if we have any furry friends this morning. I kind of hope we do, to be honest, but welcome back to Assembly Judiciary to the three of you, or perhaps the four of you. I see we have a fourth person on the screen as well. So when you're ready to present, please go ahead, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions for you when you're done.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager and members of the committee. For the record, I am Jessica Adair, Chief of Staff for the Nevada Attorney General's Office. I am joined by my colleagues, Nicole Riley, who serves as the Attorney General's Domestic Violence Ombudsman, and Kyle George, First Assistant Attorney General, to present Senate Bill 45. My co-prisoners from yesterday have been politely excused to the backyard. SB 45 is a bill intended to enhance the state's ability to combat domestic violence in the state of Nevada. In 2019, over 30,000 domestic violence offenses were reported to Nevada law enforcement agencies, according to the Department of Public Safety's Uniform Crime Report. This represents one domestic violence offense reported every 17 minutes and 18 seconds. This shocking number does not account for the many domestic violence offenses that go unreported every day. At the Attorney General's Office, combating domestic violence and supporting survivors is a key priority that we achieve in several ways. Nicole Riley has served as the office's domestic violence ombudsman for several years, managing many statewide programs on domestic violence and assisting individual victims by connecting them with services and sometimes even holding their hands in court. Attorney General Ford also chairs the statewide Committee on Domestic Violence. This committee is comprised of diverse stakeholders and experts who help lead the way on domestic violence awareness and identifying gaps in legislation, services, and systems that support families experiencing domestic violence. This bill helps strengthen both the services provided by the Ombudsman and the committee. Sections 1 and 2 reflect expanded duties of the Ombudsman to include services provided to victims of sexual assault and human trafficking, in addition to victims of domestic violence. These expanded duties reflect a common reality that many victims of domestic violence also experience sexual assault and trafficking. Service providers, law enforcement, and other stakeholders frequently serve these victims together as well. It is critical that we do not work in silos and support a more comprehensive approach to victim services. The Office of the Attorney General does not have any victim services staff dedicated to sexual assault or human trafficking, so this will allow our office to serve the many different kinds of victims seeking our help during their time of need. Section 3 clarifies that while the Ombudsman will have expanded duties and serve victims of domestic violence, sexual assault, and human trafficking, the account created to serve the Committee on Domestic Violence will still be focused solely on domestic violence programs. Section 4 makes several changes to the Committee on Domestic Violence to better serve the committee's goals. The bill adds 2 critical members of the committee. Subsection 9 adds a representative from the Office of the Court Administrator. From protective orders to sentencing, the courts are a key partner in the judicial response to domestic violence, and adding this member will facilitate communication and a better understanding of domestic violence. Subsection 10 adds a representative of the Department of Health and Human Services Division of Public and Behavioral Health, who has experience in the certification of programs for the treatment of people convicted of domestic violence. This section goes hand in hand with subsection 2B, which removes the committee's statutory responsibility of certifying treatment programs. Currently, those convicted of domestic violence offenses must attend treatment programs as part of their sentence. These programs are recommended by the committee and then officially certified by the Division of Public and Behavioral Health. This bureaucratic process is inefficient and often leads to a delay in certification for certifying treatment programs solely because the committee meets quarterly. The bill would place the responsibility for certifying treatment programs solely with the professional staff at the Division of Public and Behavioral Health. By appointing that staff member then to the Committee on Domestic Violence, it will maintain the communication and shared expertise between the program certification staff and the committee. For example, the committee is currently conducting a study on the efficacy of treatment programs. Having the certification staff on the committee will help inform the study, and the study results will help inform the work of the staff who certify treatment programs. Subsection 2E adds a statutory duty to the committee to study and consider the intersection between domestic violence and other issues, such as sexual assault and human trafficking. And the remaining changes to Section 2 are technical changes to improve the committee's efficiency. Sections 5 and 6 make conforming changes. Section 7, subsection 4A, makes a correction to the sentence for those convicted of domestic battery against a pregnant victim. In the 2019 section, this legislature passed Assembly Bill 60. AB 60 was sponsored by the Attorney General's office and made sweeping changes to the domestic violence statute. And I remember working on this bill with many of the members of the committee now, and I'm sure you remember all of the changes that we made in that bill for the betterment of the state. One of those changes created a new crime, domestic violence against a pregnant victim, when the offender knew or should have known that the victim was pregnant. This is in recognition of research that shows that homicide is one of the leading causes of death of pregnant women. Additionally, pregnant people who experience domestic violence have greater health risks due to their condition. Pregnant people experiencing abuse are also more likely to delay prenatal care. NRS 201.481 states that a first offense for a domestic battery against a pregnant victim is a gross misdemeanor. The standard sentence for a gross misdemeanor is incarceration from 1 day to 364 days, quite a broad range. In practice, this is leading to absurd and unjust results when compared to the mandatory minimum and maximum sentences for misdemeanor domestic battery if the victim is not pregnant. Under NRS 200.485, a first-time misdemeanor domestic battery is punishable by a minimum of 2 days incarceration and a maximum of 6 months. A second-time misdemeanor domestic battery offense is punishable by a minimum of 20 days incarceration and a maximum of 6 months. Because, like I stated earlier, the standard sentence for a gross misdemeanor is incarceration from 1 day to 364 days. a person convicted of the more severe crime of domestic battery against a pregnant victim, gross misdemeanor, could be incarcerated for a fewer number of days than a person convicted of a standard misdemeanor battery. This is not fair, and it defeats the intent of this statute. On the other hand, punishment of 364 days is heavy-handed for a battery that did not result in substantial bodily harm, particularly considering the maximum for a standard misdemeanor is 6 months. This bill seeks to strike a balance that is fair, just, and reflects the intention of the statute. The new sentence proposed for a first offense of domestic battery against a pregnant victim is a minimum of 30 days incarceration and a maximum of 6 months. This statute also clarifies that offenders must also attend the treatment programs like those who are convicted of a standard domestic violence battery. And the fines associated with the statute are also equal to fines for a standard domestic violence battery. Thank you for hearing our bill presentation, and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you so much, Ms. Adair. Appreciate the presentation of the bill. Committee members, do we have questions for Ms. Adair? We'll start with Vice Chair Wynn, and then we'll go to Assemblywoman Hardy.
Thank you. I just have a couple of questions. Obviously, I'm pretty familiar with this from the legislation and working with you last session on trying to salvage some of these bills that had been filed by Attorney General Ford's predecessor. I am curious about for a battery domestic violence second offense. I see that some of the mandatory counseling language seems to emulate a battery domestic violence second offense. Was that your intent, or was there some sort of information that shows that having the 1 year of counseling as opposed to the 6 months of counseling is more effective in these circumstances?
Thank you, Vice Chair Jessica Adair, for the record. So that data that you're asking about is something that we are currently trying to formulate with our study, working with DPPH on the the effectiveness of domestic violence counseling. We do believe that the longer treatment programs can be more effective than the shorter treatment programs. But if you're looking for a study, that is something that we are trying to do currently. I'll also invite my colleague Nicole Riley to speak to that particular section. She's very familiar with these programs and being on the current subcommittee to certify those treatment programs and helping to direct the study that I was just speaking about.
Thank you so much, Jessica and Vice Chair. This is Nicole Riley for the record. What we are doing right now as a state is we have contracted with UNR researchers and Department of Public and Behavioral Health, which is the agency responsible for certifying the programs, to do a full canvass of the state on the efficacy of all of the batterers intervention treatment programs that we have statewide. As of now, when we're looking at the severity of domestic violence offenders and those in particular who are battering or committing violence against pregnant persons, we do, from some of the feedback that we already have been able to collect, believe that the longer treatment is going to be much more beneficial for the offender's change of behavior and for the safety of the victim and the child. That has always been the number one purpose for any legislation or service programs, is the safety of the victim and, of course, the unborn child that could potentially be born in the interim of this 1 year treatment program. So that is why I would say that that language is in there, that the treatment programs be for a longer amount of time for persons who are committing domestic violence against persons who are pregnant.
I have a follow-up question as well, actually a separate question. With the battery domestic violence second offense, there's a mandatory 20 days of custody. Are you eligible for house arrest for a second offense?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Jessica Dare for the record. So for this particular bill, we are not proposing to make any changes to that statute for the standard domestic violence battery. I believe that if I'm looking in the current statute under 200.485 subsection 2B sub 2, there is, I don't see the option for house arrest in the statute, but there is the option for intermittent service of incarceration on weekends.
Is that something that you would consider for this situation? Because the proposed, like, obviously bill, it indicates a 30-day minimum, like, mandatory time. Would there be allowances for house arrest or the weekends?
Thank you, Vice Chair. Jessica Dare for the record. I'd like to speak to some stakeholders before committing to that amendment, and yourself, of course. But I think that that's something that we could certainly explore.
Thank you. I was just wondering if it was ever a part of the conversation or if it was just like, hey, we're coming with 30 days here. And then my final question is the requirement for the 1-year counseling. I understand that we still are working on that data, and I think that will be invaluable for legislatures in the future to determine how effective these programs are and how effective this counseling is at reducing recidivism and helping, families become whole. My question is for other members, if you have a misdemeanor, the case can actually stay open for upwards of 3 years. But for a gross misdemeanor, the probationary period is so short. Would they be able to even complete that, like, term of the requirements within the allotted time for probation on a gross misdemeanor? Especially if they have to do the first 30 days in custody as a minimum.
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair. Jessica Dare for the record. That is a very good question. That is not something that when we're speaking to law enforcement, prosecutors, public defenders, domestic violence service providers that we talked about. So I need to do a little homework on that and determine if that is possible. I do know that, frankly, this clarification in the statute, I personally believe was courts should have been doing this already. In the further down in this chapter, in chapter 200, there is a statute that states that anyone convicted of a domestic violence battery should also be ordered as part of their sentence to attend the treatments for the persons convicted of domestic violence. However, in practice, because this is a new sentence or new crime, some courts in this state in the past 2 years have not made that part of an offender's treatment. Some courts have. So some courts have within this time period already made this part of an offender's sentence, but other courts have been resistant because it wasn't specifically in that section of the statute. So that's why we added that clarification in this particular bill. But you make a good point in that if we are putting a maximum cap of 6 months, that might make this a little logistically difficult. So I'd like to work with you and some of our stakeholders about how that would work in practice.
And thank you for all those questions, or all those answers on those questions. I know that you guys have been working really hard, and I agree. I don't think our intent when we were making some of these changes anticipated the situation that we're in today that necessitates this bill. But I would happily work to work on some of those changes as well.
Thank you, Vice Chair. We have a question next from Assemblywoman Hardy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this presentation. My recent experience, I've learned a lot about victims and learned what they go through. And so anytime we can expand services and support to victims, I think it is most needed and very beneficial. So I appreciate this bill very much. And I do have a question. So it's on page 8 of the bill, at the top there, where it says, if the person resides in the state, but the nearest location at which counseling services are available is in another state, the court may allow the person to participate in counseling in the other state. So could you give me an example of like where we would need that? You know, is it they don't have services in rural areas, or I'm just wondering when we would need to do that.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. You're exactly right. It's some areas of the state that are in rural areas where those treatment programs are not readily available. So, for example, if a treatment program has been certified in Utah or Arizona that is closer to where that person resides, this statute allows the court the flexibility of ordering that offender to attend treatment programs in person in another state, so long as those programs have been certified. But to be clear, we are moving forward with some virtual treatment programs. So that is a very exciting development, though for some offenders, attending in person may be more beneficial to their treatment. So we just want to give courts the flexibility to and the discretion to take advantage of programs in other states.
Thank you. And that was my next kind of thought was, are these available virtually too? But we're just having options. So that's the intent. Thank you.
We'll go next to Assemblywoman Cohen.
Thank you, Chair. My question, Assemblywoman Hardy, it was the second part of her question, so that covered it. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. I think the questions that have been answered have answered a lot of the questions that members had, but let me ask, are there any other questions from committee members? We just take a look in this new in-person world to see if anyone's raising their hand. Okay, I don't think I see any additional questions, so I want to thank you for presenting the bill. We'll have you sit tight for just a moment. We'll take some testimony and then have a chance to come back for any concluding remarks on Senate Bill 45 in its first reprint. So at this time, I will open it up for testimony in support of Senate Bill 45 in its first reprint. I don't believe we have anyone on the Zoom, but let me give it a second just to be sure that we don't have anyone there who'd like to testify in support. Okay, I don't see activity on the Zoom. BPS, could we go to the phone lines to see if there's anybody there who'd like to offer testimony in support of Senate Bill 45?
Good morning. Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to provide testimony in support of Senate Bill 45, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. We will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 196. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Yeager, members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. I'm Eric Spratley, S-P-R-A-T-L-E-Y, the Executive Director of the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association, here in support of Senate Bill 45, and as a member of the Committee on Domestic Violence, am honored to be serving on that committee and thankful for this bill being brought to you today. We thank this committee for considering this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you for your testimony in support, Mr. Spratley. BPS, are there additional callers in support?
We will go with the next caller with the last 3 digits of 389. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Noble, Jennifer Noble, and I am testifying today on behalf of the Nevada District Attorneys Association in support of Senate Bill 45. We'd like to thank the Attorney General for bringing this important bill forward, which will assist law enforcement, prosecutors, and advocates in providing more effective services to survivors of domestic violence and sex trafficking, and help ensure more equity and effective treatment in sentencing and treatment of offenders. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Noble. BPS, are there additional callers in support?
Chair, there are no further callers in support at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close testimony in support. I will now open it up for testimony in opposition, and we'll start here in the physical room in Carson City. Ms. Birchie, welcome, and please go ahead.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Yeager. This is Kendra Birchie for the record, and it's a pleasure to finally see all of you here in person. I'm testifying today on behalf of my office as well as the Clark County Public Defender's Office in opposition today. I do want to thank the Attorney General's office and their staff for working very hard on this bill. And I really appreciate the work to ensure that we are actually studying the efficacy of the treatment programs. Because as practitioners, we've learned that what we're doing isn't working. And as you heard from stats and several other bills, what we're doing in this regard is not working. Our only objection for this bill is the mandatory minimum 30-day requirement. We disagree with changing the gross misdemeanor offenses. We believe this is what led to the issues with our Category B offenses that, again, you heard us discuss earlier. But our main thing is just ensuring that we are providing opportunities for these clients to better themselves from the situation. Spending 30 days in custody doesn't do anything to ensure that they won't return and abuse the person again. For battery on a pregnant person, this could be their first time getting involved in the system. It's not saying that they've already committed a prior domestic battery offense. And so we just believe that giving them options of treatment rather than incarceration, which costs us, as you heard, a minimum of $126 per day in the Washoe County Sheriff's Office, at our expense just doesn't make sense and can perhaps have a chilling effect on victims where they won't want to come forward or they don't want to continue with the prosecution. So those are our concerns, and thank you for letting me participate today.
Thank you, Ms. Birchie. You are our first in-person testifier of the session, so gold star for you. Anyone else in the room who would like to testify in opposition this morning? Okay, I don't see anyone else in the room. How about on the Zoom? I'm going to take a quick look over there. I don't see anyone on the Zoom indicating they would like to speak. BPS, could we go to the phones to see if there's anybody there in opposition?
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to provide testimony in opposition of Senate Bill 45, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 080, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, Jim Hoffman, Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. NACJ opposes SB 45 and specifically the part of Section 7 that increases the mandatory jail time. While of course NACJ opposes domestic violence, including against pregnant people, SB 45 will not actually have the effect of stopping domestic violence. It is likely to actually decrease the system's ability to catch and prosecute abusers. The problem is that victims of domestic violence are frequently economically dependent on their abuser. This is a major reason why they just don't leave. They would like to, but they can't afford it. If we put abusers in jail for a mandatory term of 30 days, that runs into the exact same problem. Reporting domestic abuse would be disastrous for victims because their partner is going to get fired from their job if they can't show up for a month, and so the victim is going to be put out on the street. Raising the mandatory minimum to 30 consecutive days will make it so that the victim's self-interest lies in keeping their mouth shut and not reporting their abuser. And that's counterproductive to our policy goals, because the policy goal is for the victim to extricate themselves from their abuser and from the abuser to get into treatment to stop doing this. But that relies on the person reporting abuse in the first place. Section 7 of SB 45 would deter reporting of abuse and ultimately would be harmful to the goal of preventing domestic violence. NACJ therefore opposes it. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Hoffman. BPS, are there additional callers in the opposition position?
Chair, there are no further callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you. I will close opposition testimony. I did want to ask, Mr. Lau, did I skip over you? Did you want to provide testimony in support? Please come forward. We'll go back to support. I neglected to canvass the room on support, so we'll go back to support. Thank you for your patience, Mr. Lau, and please go ahead with your testimony.
Good morning, Chair Yeager, members of the committee. My name is Jimmy Lau with Ferrari Public Affairs, representing Dignity Health St. Rose Dominican. One of Dignity's core missions is to end human trafficking. It falls in line with many of their missions, including advocating for those who are disenfranchised in the communities. Back in 2014, Dignity Health launched a program to help identify victims of human trafficking within their facilities and have trained all of their staff to do that and use evidence-based interventions. So we thank the Attorney General for bringing this bill forward, and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Lau. And I'll just check, is there anybody else in the room in support of Senate Bill 45? Okay, I don't see that, so I will reclose supportive testimony. We'll now go to neutral testimony. Is there anybody in the room who'd like to testify neutral on the bill? Don't see anyone in the room. Also don't see anyone on the Zoom in neutral. BPS, could we go to the phones to see if there's anybody there who'd like to give neutral testimony?
Yes, thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to testify in neutral of Senate Bill 45, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. For callers wishing to provide testimony in neutral of Senate Bill 45, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you so much, BPS. I will close testimony in the neutral position. I would now hand it back over to our presenters to make any concluding remarks on Senate Bill 45 in its first reprint.
Thank you, Chair. I would just respond to some of the opposition testimony about how this would be counterproductive to victims coming forward, that currently the sentence that is available to offenders of this offense is up to nearly 1 year in jail. So if we are serious about not wanting to discourage victims, I would encourage folks to take a look at the mandatory maximum of this Senate Bill 45 that I believe is much more reasonable than the current statute on the books. So while I understand they have strong feelings about the mandatory minimum, there is also a mandatory maximum proposed in this bill that does not exist in current statute. So I look forward to working with you and members about your specific concerns, and thank you again for hearing this bill.
Thank you so much, Ms. Adair, and thank you, Ms. Riley, for answering questions as well. And good to see you, Mr. George. Thank you for joining us this morning. We hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and I'm sure we will see you again soon here in Assembly Judiciary. At this time, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 45 in its first reprint, and I think we'll move along to the next bill on the agenda, as I believe we have our two presenters available on Zoom for that bill. So at this time, I'm going to open the hearing on Senate Bill 358. Senate Bill 358 revises provisions relating to wire communications. It looks like we have Mr. Chio, and I think we have our Senate Majority Leader with us to present as well. So welcome to the Assembly Judiciary Committee to both of you. And it's certainly good to see you, Senate Majority Leader, and good to see you, Mr. Chio. Please go ahead when you're ready, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. Good morning and happy Friday. Good to see all of you in person in the committee room as well. For those of you at the committee, thank you again for having me. My name is Nicole Canizaro. I currently serve as a senator from Senate District 6 in the northwest portion of the Las Vegas Valley, and I'm here today to present to you Senate Bill 358, which proposes to establish that it is not unlawful to intercept a wire communication in certain circumstances. By way of background information, I would like to talk a little bit about the reasons for this bill. Telecommunications carriers, of course, maintain facilities that allow law enforcement to intercept communications under a court order, known as what we refer to as a lawful interception. Senate Bill 358 proposes to expand the scope of lawful interception to include certain emergency situations involving hostages or an individual who has barricaded himself or herself, and law enforcement does not have the ability to timely obtain a warrant. This bill expands the parameters that allow for the recording of wire communication without consent. Under existing law, the interception or attempt to intercept communications is only allowed in emergency circumstances or if one of the parties involved in the communication has consented. Senate Bill 358 adds another exception to this prohibition by specifying the interception of communications is in fact lawful in two specific situations. First, if the person has barricaded himself or herself and is not complying with requests of law enforcement in circumstances in which there is imminent risk of harm to the person or to others, or in the second scenario, if the person has created a hostage situation. Senate Bill 358 is a needed piece of legislation to ensure that law enforcement personnel are not criminally or civilly liable for intercepting or attempting to intercept communications when they are involved in a situation involving a barricaded individual or hostages, and simply allows for them to be able to intercept those wire communications to not only allow for better monitoring in those situations, but also to create a record of what has happened in those situations, to ensure that law enforcement is in fact doing the job that we believe that they should be doing, and to ensure that those situations can be resolved without further risk or harm of injury to others or to the individual who's created either that barricaded or a hostage situation. Mr. Chair, with me today is Lieutenant Nate Chio from the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. And with your permission, I would like to turn the presentation over to Lieutenant Chio to walk through some of the reasons why this bill is necessary before opening it up to the committee for any questions that you may have for either myself or Lieutenant Chio.
Thank you so much, Senate Majority Leader Lieutenant Chio. Welcome back to Assembly Judiciary. Please go ahead.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for having me. My name is Lieutenant Nate Chio. I'm a police officer with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. I've been employed here for the last 25 years. I'm currently a lieutenant right now with supervising the crisis negotiation team. I was actually a member of the crisis negotiation team for several years prior to my promotion as a lieutenant in 2017. For those that aren't familiar with our crisis negotiation team, our CNT team is an auxiliary position to each member's full-time assignment. The CNT members are comprised of detectives, officers, investigative specialists, and sergeants from across our department. CNT is on call 24/7 to respond on barricaded suspects, hostage crisis situations, armed suicidal suspects, jumper situations, and terroristic threats. We typically respond to an average of 50 to 70 events a year. This year, since January 2021, we have already responded to approximately 24 events. In November 2020, I took over supervision of the negotiator team as a team leader. Senate Bill 358 was introduced this legislative session at the request of LVMPD for several reasons. First and foremost is to provide transparency and accountability for the LVMPD during these high-risk events. Recorded conversations can be reviewed to ensure the public and the courts, the CNT team is operating appropriately to de-escalate the situation. This protects not only the suspect, but the officers, similar to how a body-worn camera does. Second is to remove a roadblock for negotiators to establish initial communication and rapport with the subject. Establishing initial communication and rapport is our most difficult objective on every one of our missions. The vast majority of our subjects we encounter are in some form of crisis, whether it's from a traumatic event, mental illness, drug-induced, criminal intent, or fear of incarceration. Notifying an individual in crisis at the beginning that their conversation is being recorded to comply with current Nevada law can be problematic to establish rapport. Third is to improve the quality and ability of our CNT team. Recorded negotiations are a valuable tool to us as we continuously strive to get better at our craft. LVMPD as a whole has shown to be a learning agency striving to always improve. Our CNT team is no different under our leadership. And lastly is to clarify the emergency situation in paragraph B. In NRS 179.460, wiretap interceptions are only allowed in a very specific set of crimes. Barricaded suspects are not listed in those crimes that are allowed. So is the emergency situation only for those specific crimes or for any emergency situation? A couple of statistics that I did want to pull out. During our RAND study, 79% of hostages were killed during a rescue operation. When police assault a hostage taker, 75% are killed. That casualty rate in order is usually the hostage, suspect, and police. when trade negotiators are able to establish contact and rapport with a hostage taker and use as part of a team response during a police assault, less than 5% casualty rate. And the casualty rate in that order is suspect, hostage, and the police. According to the FBI, the National FBI database, when negotiators are used in conjunction with a tactical team, there's a 58% chance of a peaceful surrender during a barricade or hostage situation. For LVMPD, our rate is much higher, approximately 80%. Although that is a good number, for our agency, it's not good enough. Our goal is always to improve. Lastly, one of the things that I did want to point out is in 2015, there was a law already passed, NRS 179.463. The problem with that law is that it's in conflict with this existing law, and according to our DA's office, because of the conflict, we abide by the law that this law right here that we're trying to amend. Other than that, then I can take any questions from the committee.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Chio, Senate Majority Leader. We do have a couple of questions so far. I'm going to start with Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for bringing this bill. I guess I'm just a little confused. This is not typically my wheelhouse, but when these interceptions, is there a point where the court is involved, even like retroactively to ask for permit? I understand it's a high pressure situation, but I'm just wondering if at any point a judge is asked or anything like that.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod, for the question through you, Mr. Chair, to the Assemblywoman. Currently under the statute, and I think that Lieutenant Chio can speak more to this particular circumstance, there is an emergency request provisions that deal with specific types of crimes, but these barricade and hostage situations are not included in there. Certainly, if, for example, one of these interceptions were to be used as some form of evidence in a court of law, then the court would be involved in whether or not that evidence is admissible or not admissible if for some reason there were motions made by the parties to exclude that evidence. And so while the court is not involved at the initial onset, and the reason for that, not only in the emergency exceptions that are provided, but also in this language, is because of the nature of the actual event, in that going to obtain a warrant and then having to have that warrant executed every time. And one of the examples that we discussed when this bill was heard over in the Senate was in instances where you may have someone involved in a hostage or barricade situation who continues to cut off the communications between themselves and law enforcement to then require yet another warrant to be drafted and approved and go through the judicial process. But because of the nature of these particular situations, the idea is that we would want to have those wire intercepts so that there is good communication between the tactical teams and law enforcement and the negotiators and the individuals in the hostage and barricade situation due to sort of the dangerousness of that particular response. So at some point, the court could become involved if, for example, they were charged with a crime and this was offered as evidence to be introduced, and then the court could make a decision about whether to include or exclude that evidence. But the purpose of this bill is to allow one of those exceptions where you wouldn't have to go through a judge to obtain that warrant or obtain it every time that those communications were cut off between law enforcement and the individual in the hostage or barricade situation. And I don't know if Lieutenant Chio wanted to add to that at all.
Lieutenant Nate Chio, thank you, Senator. One of the concerns that we have, the way the language is written, is there is an emergency exception where we have to have a ratification order within 72 hours. For us as the largest police agency in the state, it's problematic for us. Like I stated earlier, this is an auxiliary position. All of us that are part of the crisis negotiation team have full-time assignments. The 72-hour time frame, what that includes is to have an affiant draft the affidavit for a wiretap affidavit, have a DA review it, and a judge then sign it within that 72 hours. And it's from 72 hours of the event, not 72-hour business days or anything like that. For us, having even with our large agency, it's problematic, like I said, because we all have full-time jobs. I would think that smaller agencies would even have a more difficult time. I can think of one instance where we had a armed barricade suspect on Christmas Eve, and we declared an emergency. And we just were unable to find a DA or a judge. The DA was okay because we were able to find a DA to get it reviewed by, but trying to find a judge that was available within that 72 hours became very problematic for us. It's a step that I don't think is necessary because we are trying to not only very much limit this exception to these particular two instances, but also the emergency provision that is in current language, as Senator Canizaro pointed out, does not include barricaded suspects.
Thank you. We have a couple more questions. We'll go next to Assemblywoman Gonzalez.
Thank you so much, Chair. Assemblywoman Gonzalez, District 16 for the record. Are there any examples where this would have prevented a death, or any recent examples where this particular non-warrant type of thing would have really made a difference?
Lieutenant Nate Gio with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Ma'am, recently, like I said, I just took over about 6 months ago, but it happened to me several years ago when I was a member of a crisis negotiation team. I was the primary negotiator on an armed suspect barricaded inside a house. We did not know if he had a hostage as of the time that I made contact with him because there was a concern that there was another person in there, which it turned out that it was just a lone barricade. This particular person was suffering from some mental illness issues, and paranoia was one of the things that he was suffering from. As I tried to establish rapport and contact with him, I informed him the conversation was being recorded in as low-key a manner as possible. And at that point, he cut off contact. We tried to work that event for several hours. I think we called in over 50 times trying to establish contact, trying to get him to answer the phone through the loudspeaker and things like that. And finally, we were able to resolve that situation by using gas to gas him out, and we eventually had to go in and take him into custody. During my debrief with that suspect as a primary negotiator, he flat out told me that because I was recording the conversation, that he wasn't going to talk to us. That is one practical situation that happened to me several years ago. After that, I never used the emergency wiretap provision or tried to get consent, because as a negotiator, that is our primary goal. We know that we are successful if we can establish contact and if we can establish rapport. If we can do that, there is a high likelihood we can de-escalate that situation and get a peaceful surrender as the result. And having this bill, and hopefully it passes, it's not only going to help us to learn from each and one of these events as a training tool, but also provides that transparency that the Nevada public is demanding right now of the police department, that we are doing everything that we can do to de-escalate a situation, and that our CNT team is giving every opportunity for these suspects to peacefully surrender.
Thank you so much. One more question. Assemblywoman Gonzalez, District 16 for the record. Would these recordings be subject to, if a member of the public wanted to receive a copy of the recording, would they have to go through a public records request? And would they be available, or would it be more confidential to the case?
So Nate Gio with Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. All these recordings, just like every other recording and similar to body-worn cameras, in my opinion, are subject to public records requests. They are evidence of the event. Anytime that a recording is made, it is evidence of the event. So I don't see why it would be an exception to the public records request.
We'll go next to Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair Yeager. Chandra Summers Armstrong, Assembly District 6 for the record. I hear you, thank you so much, first of all, Senator Canizaro and Detective Chio. We appreciate your presentation. I don't see anything in the proposed language that says that these recordings are mandatory. Am I missing something? Thank you.
Lieutenant Nacho at Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. You're absolutely correct, ma'am. There is no language saying that it is mandatory. I know since I've taken over from our CNT team, if this bill passes, we are going to put it in our policy that all recordings will be recorded when possible. That does take into account some equipment failures, but things of that nature. But for us, we really want this bill to pass because we want this, we don't want any questions about how we do business not being answered. We want to be fully transparent as a unit and as a department during these high-risk events to see that we are trying to escalate and trying to get a peaceful surrender.
Chair Yeager, may I have a follow-up, please? Please go ahead. Thank you. The reason I ask about mandatory, sir, is that we have situations now where body-worn cameras are not turned on or are turned off during events. And so it gives me pause when I don't see that it is mandatory. And so that is a big concern for me. And also this, the proposition that we can't get judges to give you the warrants that you need. That's also very questionable. It is a big question for me. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Senator Canizaro, Senator Nicole Canizaro, Senate District 6. If I can get my words and tongue untied, I think that the Assemblywoman brings up an excellent point, and one of the reasons when Lieutenant Chio reached out to me about finding a vehicle for this was specifically that purpose. Currently, in order to have these communications, there has to be that warrant in place or another exception that would allow for it to fall under the emergency provisions. And so one of the reasons why I did want to work with him on this bill was so that there can be those recordings so that we know exactly what's happening with law enforcement in those situations. And obviously, it's one way to help hold everybody accountable. So that's kind of, I think, the hang up on this as to why it is not mandatory is that it's currently prohibited unless you have consent or unless you've got that warrant or unless for some other reason it falls under those emergency provisions. And so this would allow for those to be recorded. And I think to Lieutenant Chio's point, their intention is to ensure that that happens in every one of these situations.
Thank you, Senate Majority Leader. We have a question next from Vice Chair Wynn.
Thank you. I always find this interesting because I feel like it's an exception to an exception already because you are conducting these without a warrant and then you get the warrant after the fact. And this appears to be asking to say we don't want to be able to get it after the fact anyway. I guess my concern is I'm worried about the transparency in that respect because if you have to file the warrant after the fact, at least you know what kind of like the justification is for what precipitated having to do this warrantless thing. So I'm just curious to know how we would ever know if the law was ever violated if there was never anything after the fact. And I recognize that it might be difficult to get that done within the 72 hours as it's currently in statute. So is it possible, is there another time frame that would still allow for that record of what their justification and reasoning for doing the warrantless search was in the first place? Like, would additional time be needed to kind of ensure that?
Lieutenant Nacho with the LVMPD. Man, that's a great question. What I can say is I'm not educated enough to know what exactly would be a reasonable time frame for that ratification period. Should it be 1 week? Should it be 2 weeks? Should it be several weeks? What I do know is that if the justification for the emergency provision, again, doesn't include barricaded suspects with the current language that is already in place right now. If there's already oversight through, like as Senator Canizaro already pointed out, through the court system, because it's going to be offered as evidence, then the built-in oversight that is of concern has already been built into the judicial system. At any point, if there is not a barricaded suspect or a hostage situation that is, and for whatever reason, a recording is made, then that's violation of the law, and the police department and the negotiator team is held liable. I can assure you from my several years as a negotiator and as a current team leader, we don't take that lightly. The only time that we would be doing this is when there is an actual hostage or a barricade situation. And those barricaded situations are very readily recognizable as a barricade situation. We give them every opportunity before we are even deployed by our patrol officers to come out or to have a peaceful surrender. The usual time frame from the time of an initial call coming out to the time of our deployment as negotiators and as a tactical team is usually about 30 to 45 minutes. And that's with the patrol officers initially responding and already asking that particular person to come out of the residence and have a peaceful surrender.
I guess I still just have concerns without that after the fact ratification. I don't know how anyone would ever know if the law was violated. But I also recognize that things are dynamic, and obviously there's, from the testimony, there's current struggles with being able to get that within that 72 hours as currently in statute. So I was just really curious if there's any information you can get back to the committee regarding how much time would be necessary to be able to get those reports. I don't know if it like you said, is it, an extra day? Is it an extra week? Is it an extra 2 weeks? Or kind of what those circumstances might be. But thank you.
We'll go next to Assemblyman Wheeler with a question.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lieutenant, I wanted to retouch on the Assemblywoman's question about being mandatory. And I don't know a lot about the equipment today, so maybe you can fill me in on this. Wouldn't there be circumstances, for instance, where a negotiator would arrive on scene and need to immediately contact, the suspect or whoever they're talking to, where the equipment wouldn't be available, and if it were mandatory, it may actually delay that communication?
Lieutenant Nate Chio with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Assemblyman, you're absolutely correct. If it becomes a mandatory in law, there are times where we absolutely need to get right on the phone with that suspect, especially on a hostage situation. We have a very young police department in our patrol force. I think the average tenure of our police officers right now is about 6 years in patrol. Hostage crisis situations, as you can imagine, is a very dynamic situation. And having an inexperienced patrol officer who may have just gotten out of field training or may have not dealt with something like that be the initial contact, we try to get there as soon as possible on hostage situations. And as soon as a negotiator can get on the phone, that is what our standard operating procedure is.
Thank you, Lieutenant. I just am worried about saving lives here more than anything else, and making something mandatory may possibly cost a life. So I just wanted to say thank you.
Lieutenant Chia, let me ask a question while I have you here, and I know you can only speak for Clark County, but I just wonder, under the current setup, I believe judges typically are available by phone for warrants, and I don't know yet if there's an electronic means to submit a warrant electronically. I believe that was something that was being worked on, but I just wanted to ask, in your experience in this field, if you needed to get a telephonic warrant approved or an electronic warrant approved, what kind of time would we be talking about from the time you start preparing the affidavit for the warrant to the time that a judge might actually approve that?
An HO with the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. A typical search warrant, telephonic search warrant, is rather easily obtained. In fact, whenever we do any of these missions, we always get a telephonic warrant for the body of whatever the suspect or the hostage taker or whatever. That's not the issue of getting an actual telephonic search warrant. I've never heard of a telephonic wiretap warrant. There's no template, and I've never heard of an instance in 25 years where you could actually get that done. I have done several wiretap warrants in my career, and it is a lengthy process on a traditional sense. During our ratification of within the 72 hours, the process doesn't change. So you have to have a detective or the affiant sit down and write out this affidavit, which may take, depending on the length of the event, the complexity of the event, and the characteristics of the event, take some time to do. It's not an easy process. Not every detective that knows how to do a search warrant knows how to do a wiretap warrant. It is a very specific skill set, and that's the challenge we have, is that telephonic search warrants are easy. Ratifications and wire intercept warrants are quite difficult to do.
Thank you, Lieutenant
And
Chio.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
I just wanted to say thank you, Lieutenant Chio, for that clarification. I think that does help. I was thinking a typical search warrant, but of course it's a little more involved than that. So thank you for the answer. Senate Majority Leader, did you want to add something to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and Lieutenant Chio brings up a good point. From the approval process on anything that's a wire intercept and falls into that nature, it is required for it to have certain documentation that goes along with it, and then all of those also have to be currently, there's a bill pending that hopefully will make this process a little smoother, but currently they are all wet ink signature required from any prosecutorial office that may be approving those, and also the judges who may approve those, and are currently limited to only specific judges, I believe. District courts are the one place where you can and would ordinarily go for those particular approvals. So these are a little different than just the regular telephonic search warrant. If you were looking to search an apartment, those approval processes are a little bit different, but there are additional hoops and restrictions on things like wire intercepts.
Thank you. Do we have additional questions from committee members? I'm going to look to my left. I'll look to my right. I don't see additional questions at this time. So Senate Majority Leader, Lieutenant Chio, thank you for presenting. We'll ask you to sit tight for just a moment. We'll take some testimony on the bill, and then we'll have a time for some wrap-up comments. At this time, I will open it up for testimony in support of Senate Bill 358. Is there anybody in the room with us here in Carson City who'd like to testify in support of Senate Bill 358? I don't see a mad dash to the table, so I'll take that as a no. Do we have anyone on the Zoom? Let me look over there. I don't see anybody turning their camera on or unmuting. BPS, could we go to the phone lines to see if we have anyone there in support?
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to provide testimony in support of Senate Bill 358, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. We will begin with caller with the last 3 digits of 620. Caller, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. For the record, Mike Cathcart, C-A-T-H-C-A-R-T, representing the city of Henderson. We are in support of SB 358. I want to thank the Majority Leader for sponsoring the bill, and I also want to thank the Metropolitan Police Department for assisting with the presentation. We believe this will be a very useful tool in very difficult situations, and we are fully supportive. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Cathcart. BPS, are there additional callers in support?
Yes. Caller with the last three digits of 196, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Chairman Yeagers and members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. I'm Eric Spratley, Spratley, the Executive Director of the Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association, here in support of Senate Bill 358 and appreciate Majority Leader Canizaro bringing this important bill today. We thank Metro for the great presentation and the information, and the committee for considering this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Spratley. BPS, could we take the next caller in support, please?
Caller with the last three digits of 389, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the committee. My name is Jennifer Noble, Jennifer Noble, and I am testifying on behalf of the Nevada District Attorneys Association in support of Senate Bill 358. We'd like to thank the Majority Leader for bringing this bill forward, which we fully support, and we believe it will assist law enforcement negotiators to work more effectively, efficiently, and safely in very limited, narrow, and extremely dangerous scenarios where every second counts. We urge you to support this important bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Noble. BPS, are there additional callers in support?
Chair, there are no further callers in support at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close testimony in support. I will now open it up for testimony in opposition. We'll start here in Carson City. Ms. Birchie, welcome back, and please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Yeager and members of the committee. I want to first start by apologizing to the Majority Leader, Canizaro. We did not notice this issue when it was over on the Senate side. When we first reviewed the bill, and Kendra Birchie, for the record, with the Washoe County Public Defender's Office, testifying for my office as well as the Clark County Public Defender's Office. When we first reviewed the bill, we believed that the procedural safeguards for the ratification process that are set forth in Section 1, subsection 3, would also apply to this new exception. However, in our review yesterday, we realized that because it specifies emergency, it doesn't apply to this new exception, and that's our concern. We do agree that there may be instances where obtaining a wiretap without the warrant in this for the barricade and hostage situation may be necessary, but we just want to ensure that there is that procedural safeguard. We did propose an amendment that's uploaded on Nellis. We briefly had conversations with the Senate Majority Leader, and we want to continue with those conversations. I recognize from the testimony that there are some issues, specifically with the 72 hours. Our proposed amendment was just copying and pasting that language that was in that Section 3. But I would just note, too, that there's interesting language in there regarding who they can go to, where it could only be the district court or the Supreme Court. So that's something that we could look into as well, because I do know, based off of bills that were passed in the last legislative session for the high-risk behavior TPOs, the Justice Court is available 24/7. And so I look forward to working with the Majority Leader to see if there's ways that we can make this bill better to ensure that we do have the procedural safeguards. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Birchie. Is there anybody else here in the room in Carson City who'd like to testify in opposition? I don't see anybody. Let me take a look at the Zoom. Is there anybody there in opposition? I don't see anyone turning a camera on or unmuting. BPS, could we go to the phone lines for additional opposition testimony, please?
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to provide testimony in opposition of Senate Bill 358, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last three digits of 080, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, Jim Hoffman, Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. NACJ opposes SB 358 in one specific aspect, and our concern echoes the concerns that several Assembly people raised, as well as Ms. Birchie's testimony. The bill's proponents talked about accountability a lot, but the warrant is the accountability. Many of these cases never result in criminal charges. For instance, a common fact pattern is that a mentally ill person has barricaded themselves and only themselves and is threatening suicide. That person is not going to be charged with a crime afterwards. They're going to be sent off to get treatment. So that wiretap is never going to be litigated. There will never be any evidence of whether it was justified. There will never be any other oversight of whether the constitutional was followed. But mentally ill people still have constitutional rights that need to be protected. The after-the-fact warrant process is the only chance for accountability and transparency. If we remove that, we're removing transparency and accountability from the situation. So if those values are the point of the bill, then we believe that the existing after-the-fact warrant process should be carried over to this new wiretap authority. That is the best way to provide accountability and transparency. So we oppose the bill as currently drafted, but we would not oppose it with the amendment proposed by Ms. Berkey and Mr. Pirro. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Hoffman. BPS, do we have additional callers on the phone in opposition?
Chair, there are no further callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close opposition testimony, and I will now open it up for neutral testimony. Is there anyone in the room here in Carson City who would like to offer neutral testimony? Seeing no one approach the table, let's go to the Zoom. Anyone on the Zoom who would like to offer neutral testimony? I don't see any activity on the Zoom. BPS, could we go to the phones to see if there's anybody there, please?
Thank you. For callers wishing to provide testimony in neutral of Senate Bill 358, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close neutral testimony, and I would now hand it back over to the Senate Majority Leader and to Lieutenant Chio for concluding remarks on Senate Bill 358.
I wanted to just take a moment to thank the committee for your thoughtful consideration of Senate Bill 358. Obviously, as Ms. Berkshire mentioned, she had reached out and Mr. Pirro had reached out this morning to discuss the bill, and I did advise them that I would be happy to talk with them about the bill and see where we can get. So I remain committed to that, and will certainly keep the committee updated as to those conversations. But again, just wanted to thank you for taking the time. I do think this is an important piece of legislation to better ensure that law enforcement in those hostage and barricade situations not only have some accountability, but also have the means to rectify those situations without further injury to anyone involved. And I think Lieutenant Chio summed it up perfectly in his opening remarks, that when we can increase those communications and we can allow them that space to do that and to negotiate, we end up with safer results. So I will, of course, keep the committee updated. We'll continue to reach out to those who've expressed some concerns and hopefully come up with a good resolution where this policy can make sense and provide the tools necessary in these situations. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lieutenant Chio, any concluding remarks before we close out the hearing?
Lieutenant Nate Chio, Las Vegas Metropolis Department. Again, I just wanted to thank you for your consideration of this bill. It is a very important piece of legislation. One thing that I did forget to mention during my testimony is during long missions, during long barricades, long events, some of these events can last several hours. I think the longest one I was involved in on a hostage situation went over 28 hours. And communication is established, and then for some time the suspect didn't communicate. One of the biggest tools that this bill will give us is the ability to record the conversation and review what was said. Review what was said by the past negotiators during the previous conversations that were had with the suspect to see what worked, what didn't work, and that review of audio recordings is huge for us for our effectiveness on these long barricades. Thank you.
Thank you, Lieutenant Chio, and thank you again, Senate Majority Leader. It was nice to have both of you in Assembly Judiciary this morning. Thank you for being here, and please have a great weekend. At this time, I'll close the hearing on Senate Bill 358. That'll take us to our final bill on the agenda this morning, which is Senate Bill 400. So I will open up the hearing on Senate Bill 400, which makes various changes to certain unlawful acts relating to consumer protection. Ms. Matievich, welcome to Assembly Judiciary Committee. It's been a while since we've seen you here, and I think this may be a first that we've ever had a bill dealing with NRS chapters 581, 582, and 590 in Assembly Judiciary, so this is a new thing for us as well, but welcome to the committee. We'll give you a chance to present, and then I'm sure we'll have some questions.
Good morning, Chairman Yeager, members of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. For the record, my name is Cadence Matievich, and I have the privilege of serving as administrator for the Division of Consumer Equitability at the Nevada Department of Agriculture. Thank you for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 400 to you this morning. One of the goals of the Department of Agriculture's strategic plan is to modernize our statutory and regulatory framework. Senate Bill 400 is the result of a review of chapters 581, 582, and 590 of Nevada revised statutes. These chapters govern weights and measures, public waymasters, petroleum products, and advertisement of motor vehicle fuel and other petroleum products. Within these chapters, the Board of Agriculture and the State Sealer of Consumer Equitability are granted authority to establish certain standards and regulations to ensure equity in Nevada's commercial marketplace and to provide protections for consumers of petroleum products and products purchased on the basis of weight or measure. During our review, we identified that there was not uniformity in the criminal penalties for violation of these chapters, nor was there uniformity in the persons that these penalties applied to, including somewhat outdated language that refers to a person being a servant of another person. And additionally, we found the authority for the State Sealer of Consumer Equitability to establish civil penalties for violations of NRS Chapter 590 does not currently include all of the portions of the chapter the Department of Agriculture is charged with enforcing. We found that the existing criminal penalties did not provide any exception for unintentional violations, nor do they provide for issuance of a warning for a first violation. While we feel it's necessary to hold people who violate these statutes accountable, we also believe that the imposition of a gross misdemeanor for a first or second violation of these laws may be too severe a punishment. Conversely, we believe that serious penalties are appropriate for those who repeatedly violate these statutes. The bill is intended to address the items identified in our review by providing uniformity in the penalties for violations of NRS Chapters 581, 582, and the portions of Chapter 590 that are within the authority of the Board of Agriculture and the State Sealer of Consumer Equitability, by specifying that violations for which criminal penalties will be imposed must be willful, by eliminating the gross misdemeanor penalty for a first or second violation, and by authorizing the State Sealer of Consumer Equitability to establish a schedule of civil penalties for violations of NRS 590.101 to 590.150. I would also note that we believe this bill aligns with recommendation number 3 from Legislative Audit 20-08 that the Division of Consumer Equitability establish a graduated and equitable system of sanctions for violation of the laws and regulations it's charged with enforcing. Mr. Chairman, the Legislative Council's digest does an excellent job of summarizing the various sections of the bill, and while I'm prepared to provide the committee with a section-by-section overview of the bill, in the interest of time, I'll defer to you as to if you would like me to do so or not. Again, thank you for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 400 to your committee today, and I'll await your instruction on whether you'd like a section-by-section presentation or just have the committee ask questions.
Thank you, Ms. Matievich. I don't think we'll need a section-by-section breakdown. It looked to me like we just were essentially adopting the same revised penalty system for the 3 different chapters. So I will open it up for questions at this time, and I just wanted to ask while I had you here because I I looked at these statutes last night, and obviously I'm not very familiar with these, spending most of my time in Assembly Judiciary, but I just wondered how frequent violations are of some of these offenses. I noticed, I think 581 and 582 are kind of about weights and measured, and then 590 deals a little bit more with gasoline. And so if you could just maybe share, based on your time at the Department of Agriculture, do we see a lot of this, or does it not really happen all that often?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Cadence Matievich. I would say that we see certainly unintentional violations of the statutes and the regulations that are adopted pursuant thereto fairly regularly. In most cases, they're minor violations. Again, they're unintentional, and in the vast majority of cases, we are able to work with the business owner or individual to have corrective action taken, and no further follow-up is needed. In those cases, we really don't feel like a gross misdemeanor. It needs to happen, and would like to be able to issue a warning along with civil penalties. And I would note that in all of our civil penalties, we do provide that an unintentional violation would also just include a warning. There are certain, unfortunately, a very small portion of the cases that we deal with where an individual or a business is attempting to defraud their customers or gain a competitive advantage over their commercial competition. A couple cases a year, perhaps. The day-to-day infractions, again, we always take the perspective of trying to bring the violator into compliance rather than penalizing them straight away. And we've been very successful in doing that. And we think that these changes in the bill align with that practice more accurately than what the statute currently reflects.
Thank you, Ms. Matievich. I have a question for you from Vice Chair Wynn.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate the intent. I think it's always good when we give people the benefit of the doubt with some of these violations. Can you give me an example? Like, this is just so far outside of my wheelhouse. Like, what are examples of like a violation? Like, how would this happen? Innocently or otherwise?
Thank you for the question, Vice Chair. Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Vice Chair. So an example for Chapter 581, which relates to weights and measures, someone may be using a device which is outside of the tolerance. So a scale may be outside of the tolerance. It may be weighing heavy. It may be weighing light. And the owner or operator of that scale may simply be unaware of it. It could be that a scale gets bumped or dropped and gets out of tolerance. And while there's prudence, would have that scale inspected, sometimes it doesn't happen. That's an example there. In Chapter 582, which relates to public weighmasters, there may be a violation in the record keeping that the weighmaster fails to keep a copy of a weigh ticket or is unable to provide that copy when we conduct our audits. In Chapter 590, it may be that an employee at a gas station makes the mistake when posting their roadside signage and transposes the numbers in the cents. If a gallon of gasoline is $3.23 and they post it as $3.32, and that's different from what's at the pump. Unintentional violations. Again, the repeat offender who is intentionally adjusting their weighing or measuring device, or intentionally not keeping copies of weigh tickets that may not be accurate, or someone who is purposely posting prices at the curbside that are different from what is on the pump. I hope that's helpful.
No, that is helpful. Thank you.
Do we have additional questions? We'll go to Assemblywoman Hardy next.
Thank you, Chair. This is also something I was not familiar with at all, so it was kind of interesting to read this bill. My question is, I assume they have like inspectors or something that go out and check these things, and how often is it annually or every month, or how often do they go out and test these weights and measures?
For the record, Cadence Matievich, Mr. Chairman, through you to the Assemblywoman. We do have inspectors, and I would start by saying I know that this is we're a division that are a little bit under the radar. Not a lot of people think about us, but the work that we do really involves things that Nevadans use on their daily lives: grocery store scales, gas station pumps. So I would invite any member of the committee who's interested in learning more about weights and measures and petroleum technology. We would welcome the opportunity for you to come along on an inspection and learn a little bit more. But we do have inspectors in the field. They're out in the field every workday. We have inspectors stationed all across the state. For all of our licensed weighing and measuring equipment, we endeavor to inspect all of those devices at least once every 2 years. Certain devices, retail motor fuel dispensers, we try to get to even more frequently than that. Livestock scales we inspect annually because of some federal requirements. And so we're out in the field every day, sometimes on the weekends as well, doing routine inspections intended to be sure that the devices and other transactions that are based on weights and measures are being conducted in accordance with the laws and statutes.
Thank you. To follow up, that's very interesting. So if someone is in violation, then do you go back? I assume you would go back more than once every 2 years and make sure that they're in compliance.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Assemblywoman, Cadence Matievich, for the record, that is correct. So if we find a violation, depending upon the nature of the violation, I'll give an example of a scale that's out of tolerance. Depending how far out of tolerance it is and whether it's out of tolerance in favor of the business owner or the consumer, we may simply tag it as being in need of repairs, but allow it to continue to be used while those repairs are undertaken. If the tolerance is so severe that the effect to the business owner or the consumer would be significant, then we will actually place it out of service. Following that repair, we get a notice that the device has been placed back into service, and then we go back and immediately re-inspect it to be sure that the adjustment has been appropriate and in fact the device is working properly. And then we would likely, we don't have a set date per se, but we would likely follow up in another 3 to 6 months again to be sure that device is being properly maintained and used, if we weren't going to get there on our routine schedule more frequently than that.
And I'll let committee members know as well, the next time you're at the gas pump here in Nevada, just take a look at the gas pump. You'll see a sticker from the Department of Ag on that gas pump. And if you've never noticed it before, you're going to notice it every single time you go to the gas pump now, because you're supposed to make sure that that sticker is not broken in any way to ensure that it hasn't been tampered with. So I don't know how many thousands of those there must be around the state, but there are a lot of them. Committee members, any additional questions for Ms. Matievich? Okay, I don't see additional questions, so thank you for your presentations and thank you for your patience this morning as we got through the other two bills. We'll have you sit tight for just a minute and we'll see if there's any testimony on the bill, and then we'll come back for concluding remarks. At this time, I'll open it up for testimony in support of Senate Bill 400. Is there anybody here with us in the room in Carson City who'd like to testify in support of Senate Bill 400? Again, I don't see a mad dash to the table. Nobody's elbowing each other this Friday morning, so let me take a look at the Zoom and see if we have anyone there. I don't see anyone turning their camera on or unmuting. BPS, could we go to the phone lines to see if there's anyone there in support?
Thank you, Chair. For callers wishing to testify in support of Senate Bill 400, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close testimony in support. I will now open up for testimony in opposition. Anyone here in Carson City who'd like to testify in opposition to Senate Bill 400? I don't see anyone making their way to the table. Let me check the Zoom. I don't see anyone on the Zoom. BPS, could we go to the phones to see if there's anyone there in opposition?
Thank you. For callers wishing to testify in opposition of Senate Bill 400, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close opposition testimony. I will now open it for neutral testimony. Anyone in the room in Carson City who would like to testify in the neutral position? I don't see anyone in the neutral position here in the room. I don't see anyone on the Zoom in neutral position. BPS, let's check the phones, please.
Thank you. Callers wishing to testify in neutral of Senate Bill 400, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. And Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you, BPS. I will close neutral testimony. That testimony went about how I thought it would go, so at least I got that right this Friday morning. Ms. Matievich, any concluding remarks on Senate Bill 400?
Mr. Chairman, Cadence Matievich, for the record, in response to, I'm not quite sure it was a question, but I'll share with the committee that we have over 47,000 licensed commercial weighing and measuring devices in the state of Nevada. So our inspectors are indeed busy in the field, and I would extend an invitation to all of the committee members again to come see the work that our chemists and metrologists and our mathematicians do in the lab or the field at any time. We'd love to share that work that they do on behalf of Nevada's commercial marketplace and consumers. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present Senate Bill 400 to the committee today.
Thank you, Ms. Matievich. Thanks for spending some time with us this Friday morning. We hope you have a great weekend. I will close the hearing on Senate Bill 400. That will take us to our last item on the agenda, which is public comment. By way of reminder, we reserve up to 30 minutes at the end of each meeting for public comment. Public commenters will have 2 minutes to provide public comment. Public comment is a time to raise matters of a general nature within the jurisdiction of the Assembly Judiciary Committee. Let's open it up for public comment here in the room in Carson City. Would anyone here in Carson City like to give public comment this morning? Ms. Brown, it's good to see you in person and welcome. Please provide your public comment.
Thank you, Chairman Yeager. Just wiping everything off, it says too. Okay, I just want to say welcome back to the building. I love being in the building, and it's really nice not to have one eye on my dogs while I'm speaking and pointing the finger. Yesterday was a blast. I thoroughly enjoyed that it was somebody else's dog carrying on and not mine. But I just wanted to say it's nice to see you, and I hope to see a lot of you this legislative session. And have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was Miss Tanya Brown for the record. We've got you.
Advocates for the inmates and the innocent. Sorry.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. It was good to see you. Thank you for your public comment. Anybody else here in the room? We have 5 other folks with us. Any of our guests like to give public comment this morning? Okay, I don't see public comment in the room. BPS, could we go to the phones to see if there's public comment, if there are any public commenters on the public comment line?
My apologies. For callers wishing to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 556, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Anne Marie Grant, ANNEMARIE GRANT. My brother Thomas Purdy was killed by Reno police and Washoe County Sheriff's Office during a mental health crisis, asphyxiated. I'm just sitting here today watching the fact-finding hearing in the murder of 25-year-old Jorge Antonio Gomez by Las Vegas Metro on June 1st, 2020. And it really is making me sick to my stomach. It's just the typical tactics they use to justify an innocent young man being gunned down, and my heart goes out to his family today and always. And I didn't realize that one of your assembly persons actually is representing the family, and that really makes me happy to hear that we have some people making laws that understand and are fighting for the rights of these families, and I appreciate that. Please support bills that promote transparency and accountability. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment, Ms. Grant. BPS, is there anybody else on the public comment line this morning?
Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no further callers at this time.
Thank you so much, BPS. I will close public comment. Anything else from our very hardworking committee members this morning? I don't see anything. Again, committee, thank you for getting us through 3 meetings and 9 bills this week. I think that's going to make things a little bit easier for us down the stretch. We are not going to have a meeting on Monday or Tuesday. I anticipate we're going to have long floor sessions, and so the logical question is, what about Wednesday morning? And the answer is, I don't know, but hopefully if we have a meeting Wednesday, it likely won't be at 8 o'clock, because I think we'll probably be on the floor very late on Tuesday night. But stay tuned to your agendas. And then the other thing I wanted to remind committee members, now that we are back in person, some of you will be asked to present bills in the Senate in the morning, I'm sure. So just let me know ahead of time if you're going to have to step out of Assembly Judiciary to present over in the Senate. So everyone have a really, really great weekend, and I'm not sure when we're going to see you back here in the Judiciary Committee, but we'll let you know as soon as we know. This meeting is adjourned.